We're going to get more insight into Lebanon's economic picture with Paul Gadalla. Paul is a freelance journalist, formerly based in Beirut, now joining us here from Washington, D.C. Paul, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You know, it's difficult to get your head around the size of that explosion, and right at one of the key economic linchpins for Lebanon. Give us a sense for how reliant Lebanon is on that port.
Yeah, so to give you a sense, the worth of Lebanon's exports are $3 billion, and it imports $21 billion. It runs a major trade deficit. It has to import most of its foodstuffs, medical equipment, and cars. So that port was its lifeline, and its only area where it actually had grain silos. Its second biggest port, Tripoli, actually doesn't even have grain silos. So the port was, basically its lifeline and the center of its economic and social hub.
Amazing. And I think we had a pretty good forensic breakdown on what's wrong with that government and the fact that the international community is coming together, but they're going to be hard-pressed to just give $300 million to any leader in Lebanon right now. Explain how that country has been functioning in recent years.
Well, you have to kind of almost go back to its civil war, and basically what happened was a civil war ravaged Lebanon from 1975 to 1990, and then the ruling elite that came to power afterwards, borrowed heavily and spent recklessly. They basically squandered a lot of public funds. Lebanon became one of the most indebted countries, and what they did is they only invested in sectors that would have a high turnover, mostly banking, luxury real estate, and high-end tourism. And then basically once, oil prices dropped and the instability from the Syrian civil war spilled over into Lebanon, those sectors heavily shrank. Bank deposits shrank as well, and then it basically caused an economic collapse. And the country's just been really getting by. It, doesn't have 24-hour electricity and a very arcane bureaucracy, very little outside investment. So yeah, people are really feeling a pinch. The Lebanese currency has lost 80% of its value. Now you have 90% inflation, and half the country is living in poverty.
A couple of things that are definitely going to impact the international assistance: the pandemic and the threat of contracting COVID, and of course the amount of corruption in Lebanon. How are those two, you think, really going to make this critical situation so difficult?
Well, yeah, just as I was saying, it's an the country really produced Lebanon was relying so much on tourism, real estate, and now because of the pandemic, nobody's coming to visit. There has to be a limit on, bars and nightclubs, and now many bars and nightclubs are focused around the port, so those are gone. And then, yeah, due to the corruption, nobody really wants to invest. There's so much bickering inside the government on, what should be done, who should be able to invest in the country. It's just a complete disaster, and and we're already seeing a huge spike in cases again in COVID-19. And now that the government is only in a caretaker capacity, it's probably going to get worse.
And as far as people getting in there to help, hotels are gone. As much as 90% of the hospitals are completely overburdened. And I read where Israel is even offering the use of their hospitals to victims. Let's talk about the regional support from both friends and foes.
Yeah, basically a whole spectrum of countries are basically offering aid to Lebanon, but I would say it's mostly, Lebanon has just become a cliented state where, different countries back different factions in Lebanon. Israel's made overtures, but they've been quickly rejected because of the enmity between the two countries, and you already have, the UAE proposing one vision for the rebuilding of the port. Turkey has now, sent in a competing one. Iran has sent in another competing vision. They're almost like, vultures kind of circling around the port, seeing an opportunity in how to spread their influence. You've already seen how Iran has operated in the region, spreading its influence in Iraq. Turkey has done the same, and it's now playing out in Lebanon.
It's grim, especially the way you really detail it. Food security, a major issue, and of course, the sad state of economics in Lebanon that we've detailed. It seems like right now this is a mountain that could be too massive to overcome by the country itself.
Yeah, the situation is extremely grim. As I was saying before, with the onset of the economic crisis in the country, even before this explosion, things like meat were becoming something of a luxury for most families. Even the Lebanese army could no longer offer its soldiers meat, you know what I mean? So, and now the explosion wiped out the grain silos at the port. The other port doesn't even have grain silos. A UN report today said The amount of wheat in the country will only last, maybe the next 3 weeks. So hunger and famine really could be on the horizon.
And the hospitals in Lebanon that are still up and running, they have to cope with that constant power cut that you were talking about earlier. Discuss how the state of the electric grid will affect Lebanon moving forward.
The electricity problem in Lebanon has just been ongoing for decades. It was shattered in the war, and then it's public-owned, and because of state corruption, although it receives $2 billion in subsidies every year, the country still lacks 24 hours electricity. The explosion knocked out one of the main power transfer stations in Beirut. And yeah, it's basically always deterred a lot of outside investment. People are over-reliant on private generators that have to use imported fuel. Now, you really can't import fuel. People don't have the money to import fuel for the private generators. So you're really looking that, the average Lebanese person, even hospitals, are facing massive electricity shortages, and doesn't look like it's going to get alleviated anytime soon. And the government, which owns the electricity sector, is now basically in a caretaker capacity. So it doesn't look like there's any immediate solutions for this.
Paul, we have very little time left, but I want to hear from you how significant it was that French President Macron was on the scene pledging support so quickly.
I mean, he is mostly just trying to show that, France is a main power broker in Lebanon. He's claiming that he will pitch a new type of political system or compromise come September. But you really have to know there are many other actors in Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, the U.S., and Iran. And all of them kind of have to agree what's going to move forward. It was the same thing what we saw in 2005 when the Syrians left. It took pressure from America and a number of countries. So France is only one segment, so I wouldn't say it's the biggest.
Gotcha.
And the economic impact of this is estimated at $5 billion, and he's only drummed up like $300 million. So it's still not enough.
Well, Paul, we want to check back in with you down the road, I'm sure, but thank you very much for all of your insight and being on the ground and now updating us. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great night.